joy. Sorry about that. Some, what can we say? But we're back. Okay, Hari Vilas, where were you?
Let's give a little context since it was ended abruptly. Yeah, we're talking on the topic of loneliness here, and we're just opening up with a first thoughts on a statement that comes up in Vedanta about us, about the self, kind of existing alone. Men are born, the soul is born alone, it dies alone, and in the interim, it suffers the results of its activities alone. I read one very nice commentary that explains the meaning of that. An example was given, a very nice example. When you're in the ocean, you may be surrounded by other people who are also in the ocean, but everyone has to swim alone. No one can really help you. And although you try to establish society, friendship, and love, you try to become united, ultimately it fails because you're in the ocean of elements and no one can really help each other. You're alone. So I'm getting first thoughts about this sort of idea. And is this really the core message of our philosophy? And if so, it seems a little bit depressing. So I wanted to get some first thoughts. And Hari Vilas was feeding us some really nice first thoughts. So I'm going to have you repeat that if you're available as best as you can, re-articulate that or recapitulate those thoughts. And then we'll take it from there. Then we'll hear from Deva, maybe Karuna also if you got something. All right, Hari Vilas, please, again, share with us this point. It was very beautiful how you said it the first time. So, you can do the best you can.
I'll probably say something completely different now. As we said, we looked at an extreme. The quote you gave, especially from the sixth canto, was very extreme about the isolation of the living being and the impossibility of actually overcoming loneliness while it's a material world. And then I mentioned that it's obviously it's one side of the perspective, because on the other side, and I guess we'll get into this of the podcast, but we see that our culture, ironically, is very communal and places great emphasis on the power of association and being together with other people. So then there's these opposite views that have to be balanced out. So then, at least my point was how Prabhupada was at least that extreme statements in Vedanta and specifically in the Bhagavatam is taking it from this very ultimate perspective of how the individual in his most inner core of his own experience is always ultimately alone, because loneliness doesn't arise from not being surrounded by other people. One can be in a room full of people but one can still be alone, and that loneliness relates to the reality of that other people cannot really understand you. They do not know who you really are, and they do not really understand what you are experiencing. And we have different levels of intimate relationships with people in this world, your parents, later your spouse or your friends, and they perceive more and more layers of your experience. They get closer and closer to that core, but they can never get there. They can never reach that core. We are ultimately always isolated from one another because we stay individual. And the only person that can really understand us fully, because he is with the living being in the core of the heart, which means, what does that mean? It means that his experience extends to include your totality of your experience. But your innermost experience, he is also he is aware of that fully. So therefore, it is only there that one can ultimately overcome loneliness, because then Krishna knows me completely. He knows exactly what I am experiencing. And as Prabhupada says, that's the point, that if one directs, if you look for that desire with another living being, then one will inevitably be frustrated. Even in the most perfect material situation where you have people who love people, like say, romance is the ultimate desire of that, when you have people come together. But if they're going to do that and separate it, then at a certain point, one will not be able to actually overcome loneliness, because that inner core of the heart is inaccessible except only for Krishna, for God.
You recapitulated that even better than the first time. Congratulations. I want to say this thing, I want to echo it. The awareness of God, basically, you were mentioning, extends to include the experience of the living entity. And therefore, the only way to overcome this sort of level of loneliness is to connect to God. And where we fail in our own relationships, not fail, that's not the best word, but the limiters in our own attempt to establish connection with one another is that my awareness can't extend to include yours. Even when I empathize, which is probably one of the greatest qualities of extending ourselves outward to try to include someone else, ultimately, when you empathize, you're taking your own experience that appears to resemble the experience of another, and you're kind of projecting that onto them and then saying, I know what you feel like. But ultimately, you can't really know because their experience is fully private. So I'm just really appreciating that only someone whose awareness extends to include your experience. And that's not possible for any of us. So therefore, there would be limitations in our attempt to eradicate that level of loneliness with just one another. Just really amazing. I'm just reflecting. I just really was inspired by that way that you articulated it. As always, I mean, you're hitting it. David, you got something on these first statements?
Yeah, I wanted Hari Vilas to speak first, but now I don't want to follow him. But
anyway. That's what you did.
Yeah, right. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. I'm alone. His beautiful recount had me remembering that the consummate loner in Vedic society is the sannyasi, and otherwise nobody else in any other ashram is allowed to be alone. It's basically considered unhealthy. You shouldn't be alone unless you're a sannyasi. And the reason the sannyasi or the wandering mendicant is allowed to be alone is because they know that they're not alone. They know that Krishna is in their heart. And because of that settled relationship with divinity, now you can go out and be alone. Alone, because you're not. However, the reason the other ashrams are not allowed to be alone is because it brings so much suffering for them and others if they are. There's so much unhealthy behavior. You brought up the sixth canto in your introduction, the previous video when we were discussing, and it reminded me that the character who's discussed through that sixth canto pastime, Ajamil, the reason that he's going through so much hardship is because he got into the habit of mistreating others, because he got into the habit of enjoying his own sensuality without considering the well-being of people around him. And so that loneliness plays on both, that the person who's experiencing loneliness is suffering, but it also facilitates this idea that I'm disconnected from those around me. I don't have any relationship to them. And so my choices don't matter except in the vacuum of my own life. And that's an untruth. That's an unreality that perpetuates so much abuse. So when I look at my own life and the bad habits I used to have, drugs, alcohol, pornography, etc., it was usually only when I recognized the ramifications in other people's lives that I was able to adjust something in my being to come to a better place.
Amazing. I just want to share this comment real quick because it just got me rolling. I don't want to be alone. I want to be left alone. This is from Mateo. I'm sorry. I just had to share that because it got me going. That was an amazing idea. Before I reflect, I don't know, Karuna Avatar, seemed like you were really vibing with what Dave Monaco was saying. You got something on this too? You want to amplify anything? Because you look like you were like vibing, doing one of these.
Yeah. I just, I was just reflecting that for myself at least, I basically live for those moments of connection where you come across another human being, especially another spiritual practitioner, and somehow or other, there is like mutual ability to tap it. Goodness gracious.
That's me. Yeah, that was my fault. That's me. Carry on.
Okay. It's like there's this somehow or other there's this mutual ability to tap into the universal like human experience and to articulate that effectively to each other and to realize that you're going through the same thing, and it's kind of like, most of the time people tell us what they're going through, we tell them what we're going through, and it's kind of like, yeah, I feel you, that kind. But there are these moments where there's really that connection, and you realize that actually we are all uniquely experiencing life and the spiritual endeavor, but at the same time you know, we are still tapping into this universal experience, because ultimately this material world is designed with a particular purpose in mind, and so therefore with that purpose in mind, that necessitates that we will be, as we're kind of on our eternal journey through this material world, we will be tapping into certain like preset experiences. And then when we can articulate that to each other, that is a very, very meaningful experience. So yeah, striving for connection is really, I think, at the core of most people's like approach to life.
Sorry, I was a little distracted because there's like a construction crew downstairs. I just came to know. Anyway, I like this idea of that if you're not a sannyasi, so the prescription is not to be alone, because when you're alone, there's this idea that comes to mind that your choices don't matter because you're actually disconnected or separate from others, which isn't true. And that's how you get into degradation. But I kind of want to explore that idea a little bit more from different angles. And the first angle I want to look at is, that there seems, because of this sort of ontological loneliness that we were hearing about in the beginning from Hari Vilas, it seems that we have to have some time where we allow ourselves to be kind of like alone, or maybe let's use the word solitude and contrast that with loneliness. But you have to like practice some level of connecting to your deeper self and ultimately to the ultimate self in some private space for that, to gain the fitness to do it, you know, incessantly, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I get a sense that in our generation, like the postmodern generations, we have very little practice of just being with ourselves, like some like calculated time that I'm just going to be alone. And when I say alone, because like this joke, I don't want to be alone, I want to be left alone. But that isn't true, because we go into our little cubby holes with our phones, with our computers, and there's no question of aloneness in the real sense that it would have been in the older days if you were actually alone. So I want to explore this idea, like community by itself isn't a solution to this ontological issue of loneliness. And the only, I guess, to solve that problem, there seems that we should have some practice of being with ourselves, our deeper self, so to speak, and ultimately the ultimate self. I'm trying to flesh it. It's not super clearly coming out right now, but I think you get a sense of what I'm saying.
Totally.
I'd like to hear some comments on that.
There's also Ram Lunan in the comments also mentioned essentially this, a kind of healthy amount of loneliness to help us progress in our spiritual life. I like that. It sounds like what you're echoing or saying also, Jai, is there's a healthy dynamic of accepting some natural separation from our social dynamic. And I think it's a great point that we have none of that in our constant connection society.
I mean, I also think
Right.
that a similar thing to consider the question of you have to define your terms. So loneliness it's nothing to do with whether you're with other people or not. What we're explaining here now is the psychological experience to think as if you are not connected to anyone, no one understands you, and no one is aware of you. That's what loneliness means. And there's nothing to do with whether you sit alone by yourself or whether you don't spend time with other people. That's what it means. So so we have to understand it's a certain psychological state that you enter into. Now, if you are physically separated from other people, then you can be prone to enter into that psychological state of being lonely, feeling lonely. But it is a form of ignorance, because as David Madhav said, no one is actually alone. Your actions are never consequenceless. You are always connected with others, even materially or ultimately spiritually, you're connected with God. Never is your experience completely isolated. At the ultimate issue, God is totally aware of every single thing that you're experiencing. So this psychological condition, this experience of loneliness, as we said, it is a form of ignorance. And usually it is engendered when people are physically isolated from other people. Then they can become prone to this condition, but not everyone. So physically being separated from other people is very natural, very healthy for every single human being who likes to think, because it's very difficult to think if you're with other people. Other people are wonderful, but as Jean-Paul Sartre says, hell is other people, because other people take. So the thing is that naturally be alone, but never be no, never go. If once you see yourself funneling into that condition of that psychological condition of fear, then you know that you have overextended your boundaries. You have to go again, connect with other people, because it is just like, like say, I think, for example, on our system, we have the process of deity worship. So deity worship is a form where God enters into a physical manifestation and he allows himself to be worshipped through the material elements. But it is for the sake of the conditioned soul that happens. Because the conditioned soul has no ability to see God in his eternal spiritual form. So therefore he enters into a form that is visible to the eye of the God, of the individual. So therefore we see that, but at a certain point, one doesn't have to worship the deity. Like greatly exalted souls, they don't have to. They're not actually dependent on worshiping the deity because they have this much more elevated experience. So similarly, to be physically with other physical bodies that are also spiritual, that is something that you have to do. It's like because you are dependent on being with other people to understand that you're not really alone. But in a higher elevated state, if one is real reclusive, conquer through that illusion. They can be alone for years and years at a time. Or we see like even in our sampradaya, someone like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who just basically lived as a hermit for 10 years, chanted a billion names of God, or so many examples. We see even if you look at Srila Prabhupada, how he would at a certain point, even his idea of just leaving the India, leaving the association of devotees, and traveling to a country where there is no single spiritual person around. Like that's risky business, So that's so one has to understand.
I do know.
You have to understand. So everyone has a capacity to absorb a certain kind of physical separation from other people without becoming lonely. And it is, but there is great value in learning how to have a culture of using your time when you're alone properly, because it has to be dealt with responsibly. It's a great privilege, actually, to be left alone. And that's what people claim, but it is a privilege. And you have to take responsibility.
I definitely want to get back to that. It's a privilege to be left alone. Because the way the comment read earlier, it sounds like an entitlement. I just want to be left alone. But okay, but that's a privilege. You have to qualify for that. But before we get to that, because you've just kind of given us a definition to work with for clarity on loneliness, I want to contrast that with solitude, which is a sort of something that seems incumbent as you mature in spirituality. And as you mature more and more and more, it seems like more and more levels of solitude becomes almost necessary. And so I want to make a contrast between loneliness and solitude. And in doing so, I'm not going to define that, but I want to hear your thoughts in this sort of contrast in terms of like a spiritual solitude, as Christian speaks about in, say, chapter 6 Bhagavad Gita, versus this psychological state of loneliness, which is dangerous, as you've defined it. How do you hear this? How do you see that difference there?
Well, there's I suppose solitude. It's kind of a semantic experience, right? That we mean a different thing, and so I'm happy, and it feels good to use that word solace. You take solace in something, and solitude is that loneliness which is nourishing. That I'm comfortable with. I'm accepting my position in the material energy, which is something so difficult to do. That no matter how much I love, squeeze, hold tight. There's that Steinbeck novel Of Mice and Men, and there's a handicapped person, and then the person who's his kind of caretaker, and the handicapped person loves too much everything. He wants to love everything, and he loves things to death. And he has little pets that he winds up squeezing to death. And we may try to squeeze and love our near ones and dear ones, but that overcompensation, not recognizing the limit of material experience, we do it to death, to the death of them and to the death of our real self. And so being settled in the capacity of the material energy to give me connection, and then in solitude, finding that opportunity to find the complete connection with divinity, with Krishna, is, as you said, essential. These were the things that were coming up while you were kind of laying out what Hari Vilas Prabhu said so well.
Nice. I love that. Love things to death. It sounds like a serious issue. I'm like, why do I recognize that condition so well?
We hold it tight until it suffocates or suffocates us.
Story of my life.
All right. Any other thoughts on this?
I just want to quickly highlight Lokaram Prabhu or Madhavi's comment here. Just happened to turn this on. Must have been the Lord's arrangement. I appreciate those comments so much. That loneliness is not the physical state of being alone, but is the psychological state. I know I experience as much loneliness when I'm surrounded by people as I do practically when I am by myself. So how to conquer the psychological cycle? Just really resonating. Just wanted to say.
Well, I think that's an interesting question, because it means that there will be two different strategies to overcome loneliness. The one will be when you are with other people, and the one will be when you are not with other people, because you can be lonely and both of them will require a different strategy. So I think a large part of the epidemic of people being lonely, which is both within spiritual communities and also in secular communities, is also just because people don't, forget about spiritual Vaishnav Sangha. Just speaking about the basic level of human interaction. People don't know how to do it anymore. And also the problem with humans is that the problem with being with other humans is that from other humans you get energy. You get inspiration, you get encouragement, so many things you can get from humans, but they also take energy. Humans take energy. It's a fact. Being with other people takes a certain energy. So it's just like food. If you eat from food, you get energy. It's like the basic source of your nutrition is food. But at the same time, you have to have some energy to digest it. Otherwise, you can't get it. So it's this interesting dynamic of what we see how the natural world works. It's like it takes energy to get energy. And if you think, for example, when your digestion is down, then you're in such big trouble, because now you don't have enough energy to digest that thing which will give you energy. And that's what we're seeing in the modern world, is that people, they become, one can say, it's like a certain kind of energy gets depleted, and then they don't have the ability anymore to be with other people.
Yeah.
But they also then they become starved. And it's like that condition is a very bad one to be in. And then you get into great trouble. Because then where you're going to get that energy from? And to understand it is really like a starved mind. Is a mind that will then go to pornography, trash literature, whatever. It's just looking for some kind of juice, and it's not getting that juice. Just like if you have just fasted, say if you've been caught, whatever, you fasted for a week, and we let you loose in some, and then you'll eat any kind of junk food that's just around, because you're just so damn hungry. You're not going to think about the quality. So that thing is also, I think, that has to be addressed. How people have to be able to digest being with other people in order to get that energy. And I see many people, they don't do it. Even I myself, at a certain point in my life, I was really struggling due to just taking, I think, some bad drug experiences. It makes you sort of psychologically a little scarred, and then you become very difficult to deal with other people. And then I also at a certain point found it very difficult, even normal human social interaction. And that, I think, many people struggle with that. And then when they're with other people, they actually just feel overwhelmed. They're with them, but it's too much for them to deal with it. And maybe I have some thoughts on how to.
Well, that's what I want to ask. Our original, Lokaran's got a comment here. I experienced this. So how to get the fire going. Before we get to how to get the fire going, I just want to amplify what I'm hearing. The original topic, title for this episode was OnlyFans, the sexploitation of loneliness. And we ended up changing it up, but
that was better clickbait. I'm not sure why we didn't stick with that.
That's what I liked it, because it was clickbaity. But when we first asked Harvey Loss about it, he was like, I don't know what OnlyFans is. And we said, very good boy. But basically, OnlyFans is something that really it shot up in the month and last year because of COVID, and people were forced to live in isolation. So the OnlyFans website shot up like something like 300%. And OnlyFans, basically, it's a website that hosts basically lewd pictures from quote content creators. I'm sorry. That's just the fact that someone would, they basically pose naked or do all sorts of sexual things, and they call themselves content creators. And you pay a subscription to see that actor or what content creator, that specific content creator. What I found interesting about it is that you can just go to Pornhub or something like that, and you can see the same content from Pornhub. But people are spending money to see an individual content creator. And some of these girls specifically, they're the most popular, obviously. They banking, like making millions of dollars a month because of their OnlyFans subscription. So what I found interesting about that is that people are sidestepping like something like Pornhub and paying a lot of money to see an individual person. You can actually interact with that individual person, if they're doing lives. These individual persons also receive things called tips. Only reason I know so much about this, y'all, is I did a little research. Let me clarify. I read some articles. One of them was called The Economy of OnlyFans. That's where my information is coming from. I am not on the OnlyFans website.
You're not a content creator on OnlyFans?
So I just need to clarify that. Anyway, so some of these actors, they get like tips, actors. I don't know what else to call them. I don't want to call it content creators, whatever. They get like tips also from persons who are like really into them. And what I found interesting about that, just in relationship to this topic, is that it seems that, okay, number one, they want a deeper sense of connection that Pornhub doesn't provide for them. So there's somehow a deeper sense of connection with subscribing to an individual person where you can like talk to them, you can send them text messages, they may respond to you and so on. So there's a desire for a deeper sense of intimacy or connection on the one hand, but on the other hand, they don't go outside their houses to actually engage with a real live person to have that deeper connection. And so just to Harvey last point, I'm amplifying and using this OnlyFans as an example. There's like a fear of engagement in the reality because it involves this sort of exchange of energy. And it seems like our generations, millennials, Gen Z, they're having a hard time digesting the energy from reality. And so instead of going toward reality, they go toward illusion, which, Pornhub or an OnlyFans thing, because it becomes somehow easier, or they can sidestep the complications of digesting energy. And so they're not doing well in isolation, as you can imagine. And as this is happening in the real world, it's also happening in our communities. I mean, there's a shush around it, but this is also taking place in our communities. So how do we deal greater fire? Just coming back to Lokamram's question, how to build a fire so we can, so to speak, quote, digest reality or engage with and digest reality. What strategies do we need to be doing so that we can do that, so we don't fall under the weight of the experience of isolation? That's the question. I'm sorry for that long-winded explanation, but I want everyone to get a real sense of what OnlyFans was. I thought that was really important.
Well, one thing is to mention that OnlyFans, I also checked, I did my research after I got my little. And what is interesting, as I looked at it, in one sense, not new, it's prostitution. And prostitution has existed even when Krishna went back to Dwarka. Then the first people to greet him in Dwarka were the prostitutes. And but if you look at the ancient worlds, how just like in Kali Yuga, everything is degraded. But it's not prostitution. It's not the fact that there's prostitution that is a sign of Kali. No, it's the quality of the prostitution. No, always in the past, what happened is that always a courtesan. If you read, for example, a book, ancient Vedic courtesans, not so well. It actually is not a bad document. We even have the story of Bhava Mangala Thakur. He used to go see a courtesan. So courtesans was it was like a sattvic form of prostitution, you want to call it that, quote unquote. Meaning that, another example, if you read Memoirs of a Geisha, which is a story of the geisha in Japan. So it was highly culturally regulated forms of courtesanship, where it was not just about sex, but it is about giving the other person the whole emotional and psychological experience of being with another person. But it's something that you can pay for in money, because the reality is people can't always afford, or people somehow, at least we can see in the modern world, many people go to prostitution, not just because they want sex, but because they don't have the karma for a properly functioning normal relationship. This is an interesting to point out. So something like OnlyFans, it's like these things will always exist, and in one sense, better perhaps, rather than just watching random people on Pornhub, people you don't really know. Rather, if you actually have a relationship with the person that's creating the content you're experiencing, I don't know if it's actually worse. I'm not going to comment. I'm thinking maybe it might be even better. At least there's something personal in there, and it goes closer to the ancient archetype where prostitution was not just such a physical thing, but it included a whole actual emotional experience. So that's just something to put out. I don't have to get into it so much, but that's thought that came to mind. Now, the real more important thing is, obviously, you want to stay away from prostitutes in its entirety. Real solution. And that obviously means that you have to be able to come to a certain state of being, at least being able to digest enough get enough emotional fulfillment through the normal avenues, quote unquote, through family and friends or in devotional society. The same principles are there. The society of the devotees, or within your spiritual marriage, whatever it is, to get enough juice, to get enough emotional nourishment, so you can keep on going. You don't have to go to OnlyFans or whatever. First place. I think that it is a very interesting question, and it's obviously there's not one answer, because basically it's like if you look at health in Ayurveda, even if you ask someone the question, how can I improve my digestion? It means everything. The digestion is sort of like the root measurement of what your health is. Everything will influence it. Exercise, diet, sleep, stress, work, everything comes back to see how your digestion functions, like the core measurement of your health. So similarly, your mental digestion includes, everything is influenced by it. It means the whole gamut of what it means to come closer to the mode of goodness. The more one goes to the mode of goodness, the more that mind becomes strong. So a strong mind means a mind that can digest experiences. So say something like trauma is a very difficult thing to digest. So therefore many people, they crack, they can't deal with it. But other people, they deal with it. They sort of, their mind is strong enough. And then if the mind becomes so weak, it cannot even digest the trauma of being with another person. It's like even that becomes a traumatic thing because we're oversensitized. So the whole spectrum of mental health it means whatever you can do to move closer to associate with wholesomeness. So it means even changing your diet, doing some exercise, whatever imbalance or in health or ignorance you will allow into your life, it will pull your mind down. And definitely the big cracker is drugs. Like definitely, like marijuana, even something like marijuana, it's a characteristic feature. People who smoke marijuana for a long time, many of them develop can develop certain antisocial traits, because it becomes that it does something to your ability to socially interact with other people. That is a fact. What to say of heavier drugs? So drugs is definitely one thing that ruins people's mental health. So that's the kind of thing you want to crack out. And also, just I've seen for myself, technological stimulation is like the same digestive capacity, that same digestive energy that you need to digest interactions with other people. That same energy is used to digest content, to digest technological information. So it's like you can only eat so much every day. So if you're going to use all that energy to digest, because even if you think about most of your content is still social situations, either movies and series, it's the same thing. It's the same thing that you have to digest, that is part of your real life. But now you direct it and you use it to digest all this internet or all this technological content. And then you have no digestive capacity left. Just like your mother told you, don't snack because you're going to ruin your appetite. So the same thing happens. So people ruin their appetite by overexposure to technological forms of social exchanges in the forms of movies and entertainment. And then when they get to their real life, they just have no appetite. They have no.
Well,
Start.
If I could jump in there, because I love the digestion metaphor, and I've spoken of social media before as junk, and we've all had junk food before, and the dynamic there is actually that you're never satiated. never had enough pizza. You've never had enough chips. You can eat a bag, 2 bags, 5 sodas, right? Satiated. But then you get one salad put in front of you, and you're like, ugh, I don't want that salad. I don't want something wholesome and nourishing. Whereas after you eat that one salad or have that 1 or 2 bowls of soup, you don't need anything the rest of the day. So that the nature of these shallow interactions is you're eating something, but you're not getting nourished in any way, and you're losing your fitness, Jai used that word earlier, or strength of digestion to really be attracted to or bring in anything else.
Amazing. Karuna, you want to say anything on this? I feel like, we're all in the same generation. I think I'm the oldest on here.
Yeah.
But we're still in the same generation. I want to talk. I guess I want to hear the same point amplified in terms of experience, and like especially with technology, because I feel in my generation, we were just starting to get the explosion of technology, but we still had like real life interactions for the formative years of our life. It didn't really come into play until a little bit later, and by the time it was ramping up, I moved into the ashram. So I had no connection with that until I came out of the ashram. And then within a few years, my intake of junk food magnified, exponentially. And I've seen how it's transformed me in a lot of ways. That's very concerning. But someone like Karuna, you're a little bit younger than us. So this has always been kind of a part of your experience also. And so I'm interested in that perspective also in light of this digestive analogy. Sorry.
Well, I was just reflecting as Hari Vilas Prabhu like first brought this up, that especially in the year 2020, this thing started happening because I've been, and this is something that I've like moaned about at length, is that like I've just felt so isolated, because I have been very isolated from other people, from peers, from community, from friends, and so on. So essentially, I have been like completely dependent on technology to give me like a sense of connection with people that I love and care for, and where affection is shared, right? So I have found myself like most of the time just being glued to a screen. And like even right now, like I'll be completely honest, I have to really tax myself to like pay proper attention to what you guys are saying, because I have an entire day behind me of like just taking in. And even like my work now is online. I work on Instagram, right? So like I have to scroll and message and interact with so many people. Like I don't even want to try and count the amount of images that I've seen today, like it would be, and I've listened to at least like 4 either lectures or YouTube videos or whatever. So at this point in time, I'm like,
thank you for your sacrifice.
But still, it's like the greatest thing, because I mean, I don't even if I don't say anything, like you guys are speaking so much sense to everyone that's with us right now, that I'm completely fine just being here and like and like fizzing out, like it's not a problem for me. But yeah, it's a hell of a thing, like, and it's very scary, because before, like pre-2020, I was like very, very healthily engaged in community, and I was living in an ashram with a bunch of guys that I resonate with like on a incredibly deep level. We had such amazing connections, and there was really like, we really like vibed with each other on the daily, and we were like there with each other. Deep, meaningful conversations was like a daily thing, it's, and now, God, I don't know, I feel like I've become like kind of handicapped, and it's scary. It's really scary.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears here. Thank you for that discouragement. I want to scale down the depth of the conversation just for a quick minute. Hari Vilas, you're staying in a temple. You're around a lot of people, and I know you like some of them, so you're safe. Same as you, Dave Madhava, you're in a very thriving sort of community where everyone really loves you. I know that because they tell me, and so you're straight. But someone like Karuna Avatar and others, where we're in a more isolated situation, where we're not around that support system, and it's going to be quite a few devotees also, or practitioners in such a situation. What is the advice for navigating that forced isolation of circumstance? Not that we're giving the answer, but just maybe some quick thoughts on strategies of how to deal with that in a more healthy way. And maybe the answer is, Negro, you need to move immediately. Like maybe that's really just the answer. But before that happens, what are some, how to deal with that imposition of circumstance, which has happened because of the government lockdowns and so on, where you do find yourself in such a scenario? How might one navigate that?
Somebody post that comment up.
They've been trying to get me to move to IPSI. I didn't even know. So I had a few devotees message me, "Hey Jai, I heard you're moving to IPSI." I'm like, what? I was like, who has told this thing?
It's a conspiracy.
So, until someone can move, what is the advice or wisdom that one might hold on to in this sort of imposition of circumstances? That's the question.
I think it's a very kind question. The challenge I find with most people that ask questions like this, how to improve my life in the circumstance that I'm in, is that there's this idea that I can live an ideal life in the circumstance I'm in, and often you can't, right? The first thing to recognize
God, sorry, I kind of laughing at one.
The first thing to recognize is that you're dealing with a shit situation, and once you admit that, then you can deal with the situation as it is. But if you have this idea that somehow from where I'm at and my in no way is it ideal, I can be perfect, powerful, and happy from there, then you're always going to be suffering on the cross of that ideal. That's literally impossible from the other side. So that's my one takeaway. I think Jiva, he just commented in the first interaction I ever had with him. He was like, how do I be a brahmachari in a gym when I'm going to do this? And I'm like, you're be a brahmachari, because you're not. That's not what a brahmachari goes about doing. But here we are, and this is what we do because we're having to make the best use of a bad bargain. So really let yourself admit that your situation is not ideal by any stretch. And from there, you can work with reality to find a workable experience.
Just an absolutely beautiful comment. I just love that, because the New Age sort of spirituality, not only New Age, is our Krishna conscious message is very similar also, where the message is, these are your circumstances, but it's about your consciousness. It's like, nah, Negro, it ain't my consciousness, it's the circumstances. I'm getting tossed, I'm getting my ass handed to me, and it's not going to be another way unless I actually, adjust myself and move. So you use this image of a cross. We're just, what was the language? I just really like that. I just wanted to rehear that.
The crucify ourselves on the cross of this ideal circumstance.
Right.
And somehow it's my responsibility to to use the New Age language. That's where you're going to go with it. I'm going to manifest my reality right now. The reality is something you don't even want to admit, right?
Right.
Forget manifesting the ideal. So once we can admit the reality, chant and be honest, as we say all the time, then you can find a workable position and see what can I do to actually get out of it, and what is beyond my control.
Wonderful wisdom there. Hari, you got something on this? Same question. Just some wisdom someone might hold on to in this situation.
Well, it's like, if you look at Bhaktivedanta Swami, then he would sometimes give very basic, simple advice. Like, for example, you see nowadays many people are overweight, and it's a fact. So then there's thousands of diets purport to be the thing that will save you. Specific diet, the Atkins diet, this diet, that diet, whatever. But Prabhupada's advice is very simple. He said, you eat too much and you work too little. It's simple. You eat too much and you do too little. If you want to lose weight, you have to eat less. This is like there's not a magic formula. There's like, so the same thing is that you're isolated. Why is this isolation so bad? If this 2020 happened 100 years ago, it wouldn't have been so bad. It wouldn't have been so bad. The problem is that it's not the lockdown that's knocking you. It's the fact that you're constantly absorbed in so much crap. You're taking in way too much information. Your mind is completely overstimulated. You have nothing to do. That's the actual problem. And there's only one solution. You have to start regulating it. It's like if you have to start eating less. It's like it's not like a magical. There's no magic diet. You have to start taking less. You take too much. Most people now, that's the problem. The people I see are freaking out. Are the people who are doing good? Are the people who are busy? Who are productively busy? They have something to keep busy. They're having a ball of the time. I mean, this lockdown even for me, it was glorious. I loved it. Because I have so much physical things to do in the temple. Not that I'm somewhat elevated, just I have a lot of physical, like I'm doing a lot of construction and cleaning stuff out. So I have work to do that keeps me off the computer. So therefore it wasn't such a big issue for me. But for people you have to physically spend less time doing things, like even if you have work on the internet, that's fine, but that's not the problem. The problem is not your work. The problem is when your work is finished, you still sit on the damn internet and you still look at stuff. That's the actual problem. So you have to get down, and if you only have one other person to spend, if you have only one other person that you know, well, spend time with that person. If someone is close by, at least, like, at least eat together or whatever. Like, just make do, just make do with your circumstances. Realize that it's unideal. But the hard reality is that if I'm not going to regulate my content, then there's no hope for me. And I just have to, for most people, the answer is just take less. Just take less, and then things will be better, because then you will have more time and space, and your energy will be better. It's simple as that.
Karuna, how you hear that?
Bruh. You know what it's like? I feel like Sisyphus. I don't know if maybe anyone is not familiar with this ancient Greek story of Sisyphus, who basically got cursed to carry this like huge boulder up a mountain for all eternity, and then as soon as he reaches the top, then it rolls back down again, and he has to like keep pushing it up, right? So I feel very similar, because I'm in a very, I mean, I was just laughing as Deva was what he was relating about, crucifying nailing yourself to the cross of your ideal situation when you're just not there. Because I remember some time ago, I was like, laying down my woes of like how I'm struggling in isolation to Deva, and he was telling me, bruh, like, maybe that what you're doing right now is just the best you can do in your situation, right? So just like, and I was like, no. It was just like so hard to actually accept that, and even now it's like, okay, Harry's like, okay, you just got to take less, and I'm thinking like, then I reach a point, and like I reach the top of and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take less, I'm gonna regulate, and then I regulate, and I'm going at it, and then it's just like, it's like a few days, maybe a week or two, and then it's just like back down, So, but I guess you just got to keep trying until I am able to situate myself in a circumstance which is closer to ideal, or within community with like-minded people that have the same kind of goals, whatever. You just got to keep at it. You just got to keep getting up, no matter how many times you fall down. Got to pick up that bead bag, Baba.
There it is, a little hope coming through. Thank you, Karuna.
But like, I'm like, I'm being so like mopey, but at the same time I'm doing it with a smile. So just be grateful, Jai. Just encourage me.
I want to, okay, going back to the other thread of this conversation, having the privilege to be left alone. So how do we really develop that? I imagine it's by slow degrees, and we may not reach the apex of what it really means to be truly left alone. But it seems that we need to be working in that direction to solve the ontological loneliness that we brought up in the beginning. that deeper, the discovery of that deepest self. So what do we need to do? Yeah. How do we develop our qualification for that, to be left alone, to have the privilege to be left alone? And how does that relate to our engagement with the community around us that we need for support so we can avoid conventional loneliness as a psychological defect?
I can share something.
Please.
You know, some years ago, I was also alone when I met the devotees, and the circumstance I came through the ashram, and there wasn't really much of an ashram. It was me and a couple of Bengali guys who were just like going at it 14 hours a day, taking care of this very big building. And I had to learn to just apply myself. And I realized pretty quickly that I want companionship, but it's not here. So I need to develop it somehow. It's got to come, because I need it and I want it. And going through the process of doing that, and, you know, Krishna eventually took us over to Ann Arbor, IPSI, and now the Harmony Collective, we have this community. And there was a solid 4 or 5 years of like, I was never alone. And it was suffocating at times. It was a real austerity. And I saw that in my spiritual master, that he's also never alone. And I recognize that in my own struggle to see that I'm never alone. Wow, for a decade, he's literally never been alone or more. And so now coming to the other side, I recognize that my time of solace is actually where I developed that which I have to offer to the community, because everyone else is doing everything else now. I'm literally not needed anymore. Kishore leads a better kirtan, and Ujjwal gives a better class, and Gary and Miranda cook a better feast. Like I've made myself obsolete, which is awesome. But now all I have to offer is that which I've connected to Krishna and Guru through. And if I'm not taking that time, then I'm of no use to the people around me. And if I am taking that time, then I may have been away for a day or a week or a month, but when I come back, I've got something that they appreciate and inspires them to take that themselves. So it's a catch-22 to recognize that that's the goal, is to get to that place where what I do on the outside doesn't matter so much. And it's what's happening inside that's really going to gain traction for myself and others.
What I'm hearing, just to reflect real quick, is that the solitude has like a very service-oriented vibration to what you just said. Like, I'm in solace, but that allows me to get the energy required to render service to the greater whole outside of just myself. Am I hearing that properly?
For sure. I guess I've never, I don't see a need necessarily, and I've never totally come to like an existential point of being alone. My sense of Krishna consciousness is always to some degree part of, like the Sangha, the family. That's just like my orientation. I don't think that's the truth for everybody, or the same experience for everybody. But for me, that even when I'm sitting alone with Krishna, the Bhagavatam, my japa, I can't help but think, get excited about bringing what I'm getting back to the hive, so to speak.
Nice. Hari, I know you as an individual really appreciate a lot of alone time. You point blank told me that. And I imagine you thrive in that. So anyway, same question, but from a person who really actually enjoys that to some degree, or to a large degree.
Well, first thing I really like that Madhava's point is that ultimately, like we said, being alone means physically alone, but it also means less responsibility. I think that's what it basically meant. As you have the opportunity to be more alone, means you have less actual physical responsibility that roots you in things that pull you away from the ability to be alone. That's what it means. So that is an opulence. That freedom is a great privilege. And like all opulences, money, power, beauty, fame, whatever it is, at least from a spiritual perspective, you take as much as is required for your service. Yeah? And that's actually the principle, is that it's because you have to, the only way you are protected by these things is by a service attitude. So even if you get $1 million, how will you save yourself from $1 million? You know what, $1 million have ruined many lives. You look at people who win the lotto or whatever, it's very dangerous to have so much money. I met one guy once, I was with him, one friend, he worked for many years in the East, made a lot of money. And then he decided he wanted to be a brahmachari, and then, he came to India and he was doing Bhakti Shastri, whatever. But he had this fat, $500,000 sitting in his bank account. And it was cooking, you know, the poor guy, he couldn't concentrate on anything because he had all that money. This is sitting on his head. What the hell am I going to do with it? Should I buy property? Should I invest it? What will happen? Maybe it's like, you know, and I could see, wow, it's a great opulence, but it comes with it puts a lot of pressure on you. So similarly, solitude is just an opulence. It's an opulence, and you have to be in a service attitude to be protected from it, or to use it properly. And that means it has to be determined according to what is your service. If you don't need so much, don't take so much. If you need more, take it. That actually protects us. But if you see that, okay, some people need more than others. The Deva Madhava he's in a category of a very visible spiritual leader. So naturally, a lot of his service is just basically connecting with people. So he obviously he's not going to live as a hermit. Then you have other devotees, for example, specifically those who have more scholarly work, like editors or writers. They need way more isolation just for their service. That's what they require for them to do it. So everybody has different capacities that they need. But the basic there that so if you are a person, for example, that feel, okay, I need some more alone time, I generally see that just like people who feel that they don't have enough money, generally people who don't feel that they don't have enough money, they're the people who waste the little money that they have. So I think the same thing is there with isolation, is that we actually all have some time to be alone. In the day, we all have some form of isolation, at least a few hours, an hour or two, even in the morning. But if you waste that little bit that is already given to you, how can you expect to take more? So that's the general mentality that I've seen. People say, oh, I'm completely overwhelmed, I don't have time. Well, I don't know about that. I think you do have little time, but you waste that time. And therefore you feel that life is crushing you. So the first principle is to start, like one devotee, my brahmachari leader, we were having all these plans for a farm. At that time, we had an ashram. We just rented a 4-bedroom house. We had a big backyard. And we were sitting and we were making our dreams for a farm. Build a farm, and we're gonna have cows, and we're gonna do this. And it's gonna be wonderful, wonderful. And he was just sitting there listening to us. And he was one of those people that can really drop the truth on you like a cold shower. He was saying, Bhaktas, they're having their wonderful dreams of a farm one day, and then and he said, you guys he says, why the hell would Krishna give you a farm? He's already given you a backyard, and that backyard is dying. Nothing is growing in that backyard. Why would he give you a farm? And it was really formed the foundation of how I think nowadays. Like, yes, if I want a farm, I have to start farming now. Krishna has already given me 16 by 16 feet or whatever it is that I can grow stuff in. If I'm not going to use that, why would I get more? So that's the guiding principle also in whichever opulence, including isolation. So use that little isolation time that you have. And coming to New York City was interesting for me because in the past I had a life of luxury, where I could just have so much free time and very little responsibility. And it was wonderful. And I hope to return to that form of life. Coming to New York City, you know, you just cracked. God, it's like, you know, everybody needs you for everything. And what it has forced me to do is become way more conscious of the time I have, because I literally have a little gap. You just have this little gap in the morning, and if I waste that gap, then it's done. And it's like then the day starts, and then I'll only get that gap again the next day. So, like the Madhava is saying, embrace that. That is the reality of life. You cannot have just the privilege of deciding when you can be alone. You have these little moments and use that properly. And if you're gonna think the solution is that, yeah, one day I'll move to the seaside and there I can be alone and do my own thing, you're gonna have to wait perhaps to a next life.
Jai.
Nice. Any closing statements? Yeah, I'm very much appreciating this idea. It's a very simple and straightforward idea, but often the greatest wisdom is in the simple, cliches, frankly speaking, but using what you already have properly. And if we're not able to do that effectively, then why should we think we deserve the privilege to have more? And I do feel, as a general rule of thumb, that our generation, I think we're all millennials, right? I think we're all millennials or Gen Z. Our generation, we suffer from a disease of entitlement. And that's just my personal observation on a personal level and also vicariously. I just like always this sense that I deserve more XYZ or whatever it is. And so that also plays out in our spiritual lives in so many ways, sabotaging our ability to grow further. Yeah, I just wanted to, if y'all have any final thoughts. Yeah, I've exhausted the sense of the questions that I wanted to ask here. And I've gotten much food for thought from this conversation. I really enjoyed it quite a bit.
Mine might be a little tangential, and I love where Hari Vilas Prabhu just brought that. But maybe taking it back a little bit to the OnlyFans discussion and our fascination with social media. I think we miss out on something if we don't discuss fame a little bit, and how social media is really the tabloid for the masses. And it allows me to feel like I'm important and I matter in so many people's lives. And yet when we look at real celebrities, which is really hard to define these days anyway, but if we think of the classic celebrity from the 80s or 90s at the peak of media, when there wasn't so much media that it didn't matter anymore, but literally like Madonna or Michael Jackson was everywhere, all over the planet, any TV, radio, etc. Those people were very lonely, and they were suffering a deep sense of disconnection from the world, even though they apparently were connected to everyone. And so our little attempts at being micro celebrities, so-called important people via social media, is I think it can help us be sober about our motivations for the connection to those platforms. What am I really looking for? And even if I get it, what's going to be the result? What's going to come to me from that? Just being another strung out, druggy celebrity.
Very nice. It brings up another idea, how so much of our generation, because of digital media, we try to solve our various problems, including the loneliness one, by living vicariously.
Yeah.
And instead of and then again, it comes back to this problem of not actually engaging with reality. We just live vicariously through our video game avatar or through our favorite Instagram or OnlyFans content creator or whatever it is. And maybe that's another topic we can explore in the future, though, like how to live your own life.
Yeah.
Like
how to be your own best avatar.
Yeah, how to be your own best avatar, or leveling up in your real life, because so much time is spent living vicariously now, and that is, I feel like that's a huge contribution to this topic also, why people feel isolated and alone, because who's living their own life anymore? So thank you for that. That will cue it up in the line. How to level up in your real life.
Your own life. Your real life. Yeah.
Leveling up. Any final thoughts, Ka, Hari Vilas? Thank you so much for coming on, you guys. It was I'm gonna go back to this one because there were some good jewels, some good nuggets and one-liners in this episode.
I think just like maybe a emphasis, because we were speaking about the purpose of the talk was trying to deal with a real issue, which is people feeling lonely. We saw that at base it is a psychological condition of feeling isolated, feeling good and irrelevant, whatever it is. And we see that a tradition deals with that by surrounding us with spiritual sangha. Sangha is the thing that combats ignorance, and the basic form of ignorance is to think that you're alone and irrelevant, which is a form of voidist philosophy, if you want to call it that. So we have to take shelter of tradition. The tradition says surround yourself by spiritual sangha. But to enter that sangha, you have to pay for it. Nothing is free. So to properly utilize that sangha means you have to then preserve your energy for that sangha. And that's what we see. Just like with Krishna, you have to four active principles, for example, it just preserves your vitality so that you can direct it towards Krishna. So that dual responsibility is there. Preserve your social energy and direct it only towards those to which you actually can actually benefit you. And by starting, that is the actual, and that is the eternal pull for the Christian soul, is to on the one hand pull away from that which is destructive and save that energy, and the other hand direct it into the proper direction. And that basic dynamic will always be there in every form of our life. And there was one interesting, once when Prabhupada was with young disciples, when she was seduced, this is in San Francisco, she was seduced by another, quote, so-called devotee. And then it came to his attention, and he spoke to the girl, and he looked at her, and he said, how can you make yourself so cheap? Why would you have sex with a person if you know that he has no desire to actually marry you or take care of you? And that is at the root actually of our issue, is that we do not properly value ourselves. And we sell ourselves out so cheap. Like, God, sell your consciousness out for such cheap things to people that are just interested in squeezing you for money by stimulating unnecessary desires in you. So it's that a certain sense of self-dignity actually has to be generated if you want to protect yourself from uselessly squandering your consciousness on things that are not really valuable. So that dignity, somehow you have to generate that dignity, and somehow it's something that's very natural within all of us, because when each of us is pushed beyond our limits, we stand up and we say, this is too much, So, but somehow we are being pushed so much, and our dignity is not activated. But that's actually what should be. When you look at these things, you should have a sense of like defense. Like your dignity should be activated. Like, geez, these people are just ruining my consciousness, and I will just not stand for it anymore. So, and therefore, Prabhupada says that if one wants to be successful in life, one has to be sober and heroic. And the sober hero is the individual that is able to withstand it. And if you fail, it's not an issue. You just go back to that basic dynamic of pulling, trying to save as much energy as you can, and then directing it towards its proper source. And the ideal is, I would say, if you can sit with a Vaishnava in person, it is, rather than sitting in an online sangha with 40 people, sit with one real life devotee, cook for him, sit with him, eat prasadam with him. That is, I think, qualitatively going to be much more powerful, because it is in the real world association that one actually gets a much deeper sense of satisfaction. And if you tell me that there's not a single devotee in a 100-mile radius, well, there's not so many people. There's somewhere close by. So, seek that real life sangha as a primary priority, because it will be much better.
I think Karuna or Avatar wants to prove you wrong there, but before he does so, just a super excellent point. I really want to explore this idea a lot later in this podcast series. The idea of self-worth or self-dignity. And in our man sangha that we do surrounding, issues that impact men, one of our guys, he made a nice point that his whole sense of self-worth was connected to the people around him who kind of reflected his self-worth, because he had responsibilities in relationship to them. And then when he went into isolation, by force of circumstance, he ended up kind of alone. And he realized he had no sense of inherent self-worth. And because there was no one to reflect his value back at him, he said, I discovered I had no sense of inherent self-worth. And that kind of obliged me to get involved with all sorts of things that I would have ordinarily not done. And so, it's interesting how this, and this kind of goes back to the beginning of the podcast. There is this sense of like community to help protect us. But it's interesting how people may not even discover their inherent dignity even after existing in a community for a long time. So if there's a circumstance where that community suddenly is not there, they suddenly discover they have no inherent self-worth. And then they're getting engaged in all these affairs. So I would really like to explore that later on in the future, because I thought when he said it in our group, I was struck, in more ways than one, like how this phenomenon actually does happen. And how even in a community, you may not actually discover it, even though you're like doing all the sadhanas and doing all these things, but suddenly you're by yourself and boom, that same question, that fundamental question, who am I, is all of a sudden lost to you, and you're getting caught in a terrible situation. So anyway, mic drop, Ujjwal says to your comment, and I have to amplify that and agree, which is absolutely amazing encouragement. Kishore, Hari Vilas was always dropping truth like a cold shower. All right. Current Avatar, you want to say anything final? Thank y'all so much.
Panchakalpatarubhyascha.
Are you following that? All right. Thank y'all so much for joining us here on Bodica's platform. Please give them a follow on Facebook and Instagram and other platforms so you can be a part of this community of devotional creatives sharing their real time and real life experience of how devotion has helped transform their lives. Thank you for joining us on this particular show, Arise, on the Bodica platform, the Honest Man's podcast, where we try to talk about issues concerning men, specifically the spiritual, religiously oriented man, and how he may thrive in a sort of secular wasteland, which would see him destroyed. Basically, that's our point. Follow us on our social media. We have Instagram right now. Arise Heroic Man is the name of the Instagram. And we'll be coming out with a newsletter very shortly. I had hoped that it would be prepared for today's announcement and you can like go there, but we're still working out the landing page stuff. So be prepared, be on the lookout for that sign up where we'll have more articles and blurbs about different offerings we'll be doing throughout the year so that, yeah, you can join this community and support us and encourage us in this work that is necessary for our communities. Thank you all so much. Hurry on.
One second. I just posted the link to sign up for the newsletter in the comments. So anyone who'd like to do that, please just do it. Yeah, that would be nice. Thank you. We'd appreciate that.
Okay. And thank you, Deva and Hari Vilas. Always a pleasure to have you guys on. Very sober, very funny, and very enlightening. So thank you so much for continuing to come on. You're obviously regular guests here, and we like it that way because people are familiar with your voices and they appreciate them very much, as do I and Karuna Avatar. Hari Om Tat Sat family. See y'all later.
Bye. Goodbye, everyone.